episode 11. From the 52 weeks of reefing, simple ways to create the perfect aquascape. Man, do we have a lot of good information that's coming to mind now, this day and age, than we had before. Starting with our core belief.
So the core belief here, if you believe this one, come along for the journey. If you don't, check out. Or maybe you'll learn something else.
Right,
new year, but I think this is probably for most people. I think they're probably ready for this. An aquascape is for our eyes. Habitat is about caring for the pets. And you can have both.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. But that is the core belief that I'm building an aquascape at this point. And it doesn't have to be elaborate to fit this. You don't have to spend 20 hours trying to like build the perfect HNSA. You just have to think about this in this frame of mind. And you could probably create it using anything you want, stacking it, the wall method, anything. It's an aquascape, though, is very much for our eyes. We're building something beautiful.
Yeah, visually appealing. A lot, especially like, okay, think of the freshwater too, and like the aquascape and of like a freshwater planted tank. Those things are designed for the eye. They're not designed around a very specific species of fish that I want to keep or multiple species of fish. They're pieces of art.
Often they don't even have any fish.
Yeah, aquascape is art and habitat is what you find when you go to zoos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When I heard the word habitat for the first time, I was starting to process it. I'm like, you know what? When you go to a zoo, they're they're not called aquascapes or whatever.
No.
They're, each one of them is a little habitat.
It's a habitat. It's the so-and-so habitat. It's the other so-and-so habitat. Yeah.
And depending on the quality of the zoo, the quality of the habitat goes with it, right? I mean, like, you know, you can tell though right away the people that really paid attention, you know, the best zoos out there that like decided to make this habitat, you know, beautiful, powerful, and appropriate for the animal that lives in it. And the one that I've shared before, but I'm gonna share again, it really comes to mind is the tiger that I saw in the Big Island of Hawaii. I happened to go to the zoo there. If you ever get a chance, go. It was pretty cool. But they have these white tigers there. And the white tiger actually had, I was watching it, and it wasn't following like a specific path. You know, normally you see these animals like kind of trounce back and forth, and there's a big rut of where it goes. And then I asked the zookeeper, like, why is it? And he said, all we had to do to make sure that wasn't the case is we built it into a hill where if he lifts up his head at any point in time, he can't see the entire area, and he has to go inspect to make sure there's no other tigers here. Yeah. And that was the thing that keeps it interesting for him and prevents him from essentially going out of his mind, you know, creating a rat. I'm like, well, he really thought about what this animal needs and its normal behavior, applied it, and produced a much better result. We can do that in our tanks as well. So core belief here, an aquascape's for our eyes, habitat's about caring for our pets. You can have both. What do we believe matters most?
First thing we believe matters most about the perfect aquascape habitat means safety and shelter. So both of those. It's not, this one, you know, is one that you found in the 360 is with the, after seeing the fish engage in the tank where you had an aquascape, not necessarily a habitat or a habitat for those types of fish. But as soon as you put the little HNSA little homes that you built, these little tiny pieces and whatnot, immediately fish swam in there and now they're safe, the shelter, happy fish.
You know, so I had overhangs and stuff, and I thought that, you know, that was kind of enough, you know, they could kind of huddle under there. And it just turns out like that, you know, shelter and safety for a lot of fish means I'm kind of surrounded by on three sides. Yeah. You know, that they can kind of go in something and feel comfortable. And then what we found is like the first reaction is, well, I don't want that. I don't want to have my fish hiding from me all the time. It's actually, we're finding the opposite is that happy, you know, healthy fish that feel like they have safety and security tend to swim in the water more often because they have the place to go when they're not. They're not getting harassed by all the other fish. And actually, we saw this first, and I think this isn't necessarily an aquascape, but it is habitat in relation to the clown harem series, where we had enough of the rose, bubble tip, anemones in there that like they would chase each other around, but they all had so much habitat, nobody
Yeah.
really cared about anybody else's, you know? And so the same thing when we built these habitat-based structures is if you can put enough holes, enough nooks and crannies in there, that you'll actually find safer, happier, more secure fish that will also be less stressed, less prone to spreading disease around, less prone to mortalities, less prone to just killing each other, right? And you'll have higher rates of introduction too. So like when I add a new fish to the tank, there'll be excess amount of habitat and shelter that when the fish needs to, it'll go find one that isn't already housed by somebody else, right? You're just going to have a whole different trajectory if you think about what the animal needs and provide that for it as well.
Next one, believe matters most. For many tanks, the aquascape, the beauty or architecture of the tank. So the aquascape ties it together.
Okay, you know what? Sometimes you don't want that many fish.
Yeah.
Like, so we've seen those ones where like somebody built like almost like a tree of corals, right?
Yep.
You know, they build out the branches and then they plant all the corals on it. And it becomes like a big floating tree or something cool like that. And the only thing in there is like one yellow tank. Well, you know what, man? Like in that environment, habitat really isn't very important.
No. Yeah.
So decide what it is you're trying to achieve here, because if the only thing is I want a beautiful, stunning aquascape that is really powerful looking and I want a lot of negative open space, well, just don't add 80 fish to that tank and you'll probably be good. So you find the balance between these things. If I want a lot of fish, you'll have higher success rates or higher percentage success rates if I find that I provide the shelter and security that these fish want.
And habitat doesn't necessarily only apply to fish either. We're talking, there's habitat for corals too. So you think about the way that you plan out those types of aquascapes for corals and coral growth and less chemical warfare in between the two. What we believe matters most is epoxy is best on dry rock. Found that one out with a dropping aquascapes onto the ground at a foot and upwards of 5 feet. And also found that epoxy is not the solution on wet rock.
You know, it's so funny. I hated epoxy, man. My only experience with epoxy up until like a couple of weeks ago was like trying to push it into wet rock underwater, and all it does is like deteriorate, never sticks the way I want. Yeah. It takes forever to cure. The skimmer's going nuts, and like, is it killing the fish? No, but like whatever is in the water that's clouding it up and making the skimmer go crazy probably isn't great for the fish's gills. Maybe not toxic, man, but like, I don't know. There's nothing about the whole epoxy thing that I liked. And then when I found the coral gum from Tudens like that, I'm never going back.
Yeah, for underwater.
None of that stuff happens. Cures fast, all the other stuff.
But when you're aquascaping dry rock, and especially when you're making the HNSAs and the impossible angles and all of the weight of this thing being supported back here on this single joint, when you're able to put epoxy underneath and smash into the crevices and the nooks and the crannies, and then it cures in a matter of minutes, and now that is a stable, strong bond that you can't hardly break. Not only that, but even because it's underneath those joints, it naturally hides it. 100% epoxy. You can't get mortar up in there unless you make it really thick and then sling it in there, and then it drips out. It's a mess. Yeah. Okay.
In fact, when we were creating one of the first HNSA, I was back there slathering all of this cement on there or mortar, and it's like, oh God, we're just mixing, and I forgot how big a pain in the ass because it turns to rock so quickly.
Yeah, it does.
And you have to find that perfect consistency, and even if you measure it out and I use grams and a certain amount of water, it's always this mess, man. Trying to go back and forth. I'm looking for this perfect peanut butter thing, because if it's too dry, it gets crumbly. It's too wet, it's sloppy. And I'm like right in the middle of starting that, I'm like, oh God, I hate this. And then I watched your video that came out literally that week, and I'm like, oh my God, epoxy.
Why am I not using epoxy?
We tried one, and I'm like, Dave smushed them up, he gave it to me, like, where you been my whole life? I just like dry rock, wet, I still hate it. Dry though, this is the way. And then when we built the most recent Aquascape that we gave away in the Dream tank, you know, I was able to secure that whole thing using epoxy almost exclusively just from the bottom, where I didn't have to cover it up anymore. And then under the bottom, when you put it into all the crevices, you don't even see it. You don't even have to hide it. It's so well smushed into everything. You know, roll it up into a little tube, pack it in there, and you're done. And like we found that the sea cam cures in about 5 minutes, and the 2 little fishes is about 20 minutes. If you have a partner with you doing it, I think the 5 minutes is best. If you're doing it all your own, probably 20 minutes is best. So, and one's darker, but they both cover really easy. So I think that, yeah, man, epoxy is your best friend if you want to do this. Is it more expensive? Absolutely more expensive. But it's super strong, and it's way easier to do. So, in fact, you know, like for some people, just the cheapest is the only thing. But in this case, I think you could probably shave off 5-6 hours of work by using epoxy over the mortar and have a more desirable result in the end. And so the $100 in epoxy may very well be worth it.
Speaking of cheap option, what we believe matters most is mortar is the cheapest on dry rock. And I mean, the bucket of Marco mortar, purple or gray or what have you, it makes a lot. I think I used only half for my mom's entire Aquascape on her 120.
I'll give 2 things to mortar. So the mortar, you get the same result as you can get in epoxy. Is it as strong as the epoxy? I don't think it fits into all the nooks and crannies the same way. And you can't apply it as perfectly to all the areas. So probably not as strong, but definitely strong enough. Right. So use the mortar. The one thing that it really does well, though, if you go look actually at the original NSA, is you can use it to fill in some of the holes on the Marco rock, because it's usually so porous. And it gives it kind of more smooth ledge-like an appearance. You know, and so like when you look at the Haitian rock that's in my tank at home, it has that smooth, like plating type appearance to it. And you can actually fill in those holes with the mortar. And I didn't do that on purpose. I was actually doing that because I wanted to slather it on the top, and it just kind of went over on the edges, and you know, so be it. But eventually you could kind of see like, oh, well, wouldn't it look a little bit better if I filled in those couple holes too, because they'll look an anomaly. But now I got these nice, smooth, you know, arms on the thing. So you can use the mortar for multiple things, but definitely it is. If you're looking for, if a little extra work's okay, it's definitely cheaper.
Yeah, that's another point too, is the mortar texture's easier. And so epoxy, you found one of the reasons that we weren't talking about epoxy, you know, and you weren't considering epoxy in the first place, is the experiences that we had with it. My experience too was using it underwater, and when I smashed that epoxy into the joints of the rock and it's wet, and then I put it back under the water, guess what's left over? My thumbprint is right in the epoxy, and now it cures that way.
Super smooth.
Yeah, and then I used mortar. You know, I used mortar on dry rock and found that the texture's really there. You kind of did the same thing. Well, then out of that bred the hybrid of taking the epoxy, smashing it in place, and then you take a little piece of rock rubble and you smash it and imprint into the epoxy. Guess what? It looks like a piece of regular rock when it dries.
Yeah. All you need to do is give it some irregular surface, and then it will hide. The moment that you put that liquid general bonding glue and then throw some of the sand or rock dust on it,
regular
it's gone,
texture.
Man. You'll never even know. Like, you can look at this whole Aquascape. You can't see it from behind us, but like, you can't see a single piece of where one thing started and the other, not a single smooth piece of epoxy, and it's so easy.
Some chunks look like, oh, that's a single rock that you picked, and then you're like, no, it's about six pieces. You wouldn't even you wouldn't guess.
You'd never know. Yeah, I mean, even the whole thing to some degree. Yeah. All right, for wet rock though, our belief here what is right? What is the best for wet rock?
Super glue is the best for wet rock. And again, from the Investigates test that I did, you know, we soaked some rocks for a while. Then we took them out, applied all different adhesives, mortar, super glue, epoxy, hybrid type of sandwiches, all kinds of stuff. Put them back together, and the ones that actually ended up holding the best, because, and I believe it's because cyanoacrylate cures through moisture, was the super glue.
Yeah. So out of water, super glue, using the, you know, whatever gel you want to use. Underwater, make sure you don't use bottles, because if you let up on it a little bit, it'll suck water into it.
There goes your whole bottle.
Yeah, the whole bottle's ruined. What you want to use is the like 20-gram tubes that, you know, when you squeeze it, it's like the little aluminum tubes or whatever they are.
Yep.
But yeah, if you're going to do aquascaping, I will find not only is the super glue stronger for wet surfaces than epoxy or cement, but it also hides much better, because you're not going to come back and cover it in dust or whatever, right? Glue, and you're going to go through those elaborate steps in wet rock. So, you know, glue, you can actually, you know, get balls of the glue, or you can get it in areas, and it has a little nozzle on it. You can form it around areas and not have it, and it's clear. It's like the part about the epoxy is that the cement doesn't work on wet anything at all. But the part about the epoxies is gray might look best on dry rock today, the lightest gray being maybe that Seachem stuff today. But eventually the rock is going to turn purple, and then the gray doesn't look good. And a lot of times the coralline doesn't grow on the epoxy
for quite a
perfectly.
while.
And you just see this, and if you use
a purple
purple on white rock looks ungodly awful. I would never in a million years.
And you have to wait until it catches up.
It just, I mean, for the next 2 years, all you're going to see is this, ugh.
Yeah.
Okay, so super glue on wet rock is probably the best solution.
This is you know, the people that always that ask the question. So I've had my rock curing for however many months, or I listened to what you guys said, and I said the first time I'm thinking about setting up a tank, I buy my rock right then and there and get it soaking and then stuff like that. Well, now we're saying, you know, you spend some time on the Aquascape and do it dry. So if I followed our advice and I started cycling my rock, and now I want to build an aquascape out of it, super glue, because it's already wet.
So I'm going to amend that counsel now. And the counsel, like, because at the time when we were talking about that, like, it wasn't really a priority for me to build a aquascape that could be removed. And now with these HNSAs, one of the things I like the most about it is I can remove the whole thing without worrying about, do I have to stack it back together? Can I get a fish out? Can I get whatever out? Can I move this tank around the house, or to a new location in a different house, or to the office, or whatever I want to do with it? Having a single aquascape makes that so much easier. So I'm going to amend that advice to cycling the rock ahead of time, to don't cycle the rock, build the aquascape.
Buy your rock, build the aquascape, cycle the aquascape.
Cycle that when you do the rest of it.
Yeah, I mean, you just hit on the next one. What we believe matters most is build the aquascape to be removed, just for those very purposes. Like the Dream Tank giveaway, the Dream Reef giveaway, the aquascape that you built, 3 pieces. The E170 is one where this lesson would have been learned. This is kind of where we learned the lesson. Was you know, there's fish in there that we wanted to get out. Hard to do when all the rock is just stacked on top of each other, and the E170 is fully grown out. You know, there's large, beautiful colonies. Removing any one piece of rock would ruin the whole thing. Putting it back together would be even more difficult. However, if we would have just done one structure, built it to be removed, we could have easily picked that whole thing up, corals and all, caught the fish, drop it right back in, and everybody's hunky-dory.
So there's another issue that we run into now, which is the XXL 750. We have like the first generation of that tank from Red Sea. And as anybody else who bought that tank in the beginning knows, that one had a problem because it didn't support the front pane proper. And so that thing has a weak spot, and some of these things are failing. You know, this is a 5-year-old tank.
Big tank too.
I would like to solve that problem, right? but
We
the
can't-
tank is just now coming into itself. Actually, probably I guess it's only like 3 years, but like it's just now coming into itself. We had some hurdles in the beginning, and now like there's really like a lot of the corals are like now colonies in there. But if I want to move this to a new tank, even if it was the exact same size tank, I can't. We cannot take all of that rockscape out and have it stacked back. We're going to have mortalities for sure. It will never look the same.
Catastrophic destabilizing event.
It would be a major setback for that tank. If we had 3 rock structures in there that look like they're intertwined, but all removable by themselves, we would lift it out, put it into a horse trough. Probably most of the corals, anything that didn't get bumped would be just fine.
Get the exact same new updated tank, throw it in place, plumb it, put it
back in. There's so many instances, and it doesn't matter if you're doing the HNSA, you're doing just stacking rock. If you can build it in a manner where it's strong enough with the epoxy or mortar or whatever you're using so that you could lift it out, there's so many points in your journey where you'll say, man, am I glad I made that step. You'll never regret that you did that step.
No, I don't think so.
You'll never like, oh, that was a total giant waste of time.
Man, I want to really move that piece of rock up to there now. No.
I will never, no matter how I do it, ever build an aquascape that can't be removed as either one piece or single intertwining pieces that can go in and out of the tank the exact same way that they went in.
Yep.
All right, next one.
Believe matters most is build it for flow. And we talked about this yesterday in the flow episode where you went back over the flow. And the good thing about the HNSAs that you're kind of building and these things are, one, made with the fish and the habitat in mind, made with the aesthetic appeal of an aquascape in mind. But inherently with that comes the built for flow too, because it's it's NSA was the negative space aquascape, and the HNSA is the habitat negative space aquascape. That N and the S, a part of the acronym being negative space, makes it designed for flow in mind.
Yeah, the more open area, the more flow there'll be. The more areas you can put it in. The big one for me is actually getting flow behind the rock work and opening up everything that does. In fact, I remember when Joe from Unique Corals was here doing the aquascape on the 750. What he did is put cardboard on the back of it as a reminder to never touch.
No zone.
Don't ever touch the cardboard because we need to be able to have flow behind. And this is a guy that, Unique Corals, I think it's Manhattan Reefs. He has coral farms in LA, one of the most successful people. And every single person that I've talked to will tell you about the benefits of getting flow in and around as many areas as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So, and not having dead spots all over the tank. So
that brings to mind, building this, going back to the core belief here of an aquascape's for our eyes, habitats for the pets. Corals are living creatures. They are pets, essentially. And, when you're building for a habitat for your corals and a habitat-focused environment for corals, but yesterday's conversation about flow and how, flow is more important, is one of the more important things. That's where building these aquascapes, you're keeping the habitat of the coral in mind because they need that flow. So I can put corals in. I'm gonna keep looking over here because the HNSA is over there, but you can put corals anywhere in there and trust that it will have the proper amount of flow that it needs.
Yeah, never will worry about that problem. So when you're building it, think about the habitat, think about the flow, think about how the visual looks, but also think the next one. What we believe matters most is stability, and that's really kind of how it's down to the newer entries of the foundation rock, which means rock that's been machined flat on the bottom. And what that rock allows you to do is people talk all the time about should I put it on, stack the rock on top of the sand? Should I put it on the bottom of the sand? Will it settle out? Will it fill in? Blah, blah, blah. Well, the reality is I want this flat surface on the bottom of the tank, like on the glass, right?
ABS.
Yeah. Or ABS, whatever. I want it on the bottom of the tank. I want this, big flat surface that doesn't rock or roll, and the bigger the better. It'll attach on one area. This foot will act as a lever to hold all the weight. I would never build an aquascape without the foundation pieces again. And some of them are really thin. They're only an inch or so thick. And so a lot of it will actually be hidden by the sand as the sand goes over the top of it. So you won't even see it in many cases, but you'll see the structure will be really, really sound and will never topple over.
Yeah.
So just relying on round surfaces that kind of roll around and settle out, why? Yeah, there's a better way.
Another thing we believe matters most is you're not stuck with boulders. That's the way Marco rock comes to you. That's the way all rock has been delivered up till then. And you know, when I would get rock, I'd be like, man, these are the pieces I'm stuck with. And I know I can break up a few chunks and get different, you know, angles and pieces on it. But you took it to the next level and broke them up into tiny little pieces, reassembled them all back together.
You know, it's funny. I guess like
you were probably good at Legos.
Well, I've been doing this actually now. If you go watch, like, do you remember the video where we use a chisel and a hammer to carve holes through Pucani?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like we've been doing this stuff for ages. You know, it's just like different rocks give you different abilities, but the Pucani was kind of softer and porous. Soft. And so with a chisel and a hammer, like a fine, like a wood chisel, you could take a piece and like carve an entire hole all the way through the middle and maintain the whole structure. Or I could take a big boulder and then carve out a big, huge concave to create an overhang with it. And so you're not stuck with what you get. You can actually create what you want. Now with you know, the Marco rock, you can break it up and create whatever the hell you want. Like, you can make any structure that you'd ever want.
Any shape, size.
Just break it up, put it back together.
Make a little stick figure guy.
I will say there is a little bit of the, you have to be good at Legos. A little bit of memory.
There's like a design aspect to it, a creativeness, creativity aspect to it too. Maybe if I put my mind to it, I could probably come up with something, but you have more patience than I do.
Well, you know what actually is, there's true inspiration of doing it yourself. And then there's also just emulating others.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can go watch our aquascapes and say, it's different to like decide like I'm going to create this idea out of my head, or I can just say, you know what, I like that one. I'm going to try my best to make it emulate that, and we'll always deviate to your own thing. But that's what in the last video on how to do the HNSA, I asked everybody, when you build one, upload a video of it or show it on Facebook or Instagram with the hashtag HNSA, and other people will be able to see what you created as inspiration for their own. So,
another good part about doing it in the fashion that you do with little tiny bits is you start to build it and you go, man, I really hate that spot or I hate that piece. Break that chunk off.
Break it right off.
Easy.
Start over.
Start over. Go a different direction with it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just chisel and hammer. It's a very interesting. So, like, I would say most people were just stacking rock for most of the 20 years I've been doing this. Yep. So, like,
I don't think I did anything.
Close to anyway.
I didn't do anything other than try the metal rod or the fiberglass rod trick to make an overhang.
Yeah, I hated that method. It was really hard. Yeah. All right. So another piece, what matters most here is consider subhabitats.
Yeah, the little, you know, people say, a lot of times when you want a coral, you know you have a coral that's going to spread like crazy. You put it on an island, but you can turn those islands, or you can just like you had. Was it Antheas that you needed a home and didn't really have a space in your Tahitian aquascape in there. Build them a little kind of igloo HNSA, tiny little structure, drop it in. They live there now.
Yeah, so all you need is a bunch of rubble and just kind of layer it together, and there'll be little holes all over the place. And visually, out from the outside, it'll actually just look like an island, right? But it's actually just a network of little holes. And Eurasias will live in there. You'll see like chromis and stuff that would normally live in it. Acros will like all swarm into it. And, you know, a lot of like community type fish will live those things. So if you have like a NSA and you just don't want to fill all that space in, create little habitats somewhere else in the tank. You can actually just lean them up against the rock too. And actually, I found that I could build those little mini habitats. And then
Stack them on top of each other.
well, I found if I put them onto areas of the aquascape already built, it actually finished. It was like a finishing touch in many cases. So, consider that you have little islands and subhabitats will be great for corals that you just don't want to spread, but also great for little colonies of fish or wrasses as well. Okay, another thing we believe matters most is the highest percentage results come from inspiration or emulation. So if this is your first rodeo, like I just said a moment ago, go find an aquascape out there. Google it, Google the HNSA, Google just aquascaping, whatever it is, and say, that one speaks to me. Go try to
build
create
it.
something like that, or take elements from it for yourself, because stacking rock nobody needed help with. Stack all the rock on it and make a big wall. Nobody really needed help with that.
No.
But if you want to create something really cool and interesting and you've never done it before, often the highest percentage results is something you'll be really happy and proud of will come from the inspiration of the people that have done it before you, especially the ones that have done it really well.
If you're inspired by the HNSA or the NSA, we've got 2 1-hour-long videos how to do them.
Yeah, well, the one is like literally, man, we walk through every last step, and it is like 50 minutes. But like it's the finer details that really help you succeed in this case. Yeah. So let's share them all.
Next thing we believe matters most is this is all why a deeper and tall tank is better for a reef. Like deeper meaning front to back than it is tall, being better than for a reef.
Yeah, so reef tanks, I don't know why, but so many of them are the same dimensions as they are tall, and many of them are actually like not as deep. They're only 18 inches and they're 24 inches tall. It makes for a really crappy aquascape in most cases. It's really hard to create that depth. I will tell you, working on the Dream Tank one, which is 29 inches deep and 22 tall, was a dream. It allowed for so many more changes, or like sense of depth, and like how the aquascape could just kind of sprawl instead of just being this like wall that you'd have to like look for height everywhere.
Build up, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think anybody that's ever had a tank that was deeper front to back than tall will tell you they really, really, really like it. And it's usually experienced reefers, because I don't know why, but like there aren't that many deep dimension tanks out there, especially in various grades. Like they exist like in marine lands and stuff, but like the Red Seas and the water boxes and stuff of the world don't really make them that I'm aware of anyway. And so they don't really exist in a common format, and so you have to get them custom, which makes it expensive. Yeah. Hopefully somebody will start making more like reef ready, really.
Yeah, redefine the term reef ready to mean deeper front to back than tall.
Yeah,
plus your overflows are.
But when you're building habitat, you're building a really beautiful, powerful aquascape. Deeper front to back is how you're going to do it. Okay, hard lessons on aquascaping, starting with a couple days now will pay for years to come. So a lot of people we've shared the past, and they're like, well, I'd never spend that much time on it. Actually, even you said that.
Yeah, I still don't think I could.
But here's the thing is, like, they got easier each time. And the last one took me about 20 hours to do. And yeah, 20 hours sounds like a lot. But at the same time, I'm going to be looking at this thing hopefully for 5, 6+ years, man. Like, I'm going to be looking at it for a long time. And every time I see it and somebody says, man, that's cool, a little shot to my pride, right? like, yeah, I did that. And that was really fun. Actually, it was something I really enjoyed. And so it's a hobby. It's not a race. I'm not here like trying to get to the finish line as fast as possible. In fact, in some cases, I wish the finish line was a little further out so I could enjoy the other steps along the way. So, obviously you don't always agree with this one.
This one is, I don't know if I have the patience to spend a week on an aquascape.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, man, because it's to each their own.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't do it any other way, and we've had this conversation 15 times now. And you're like, nope, I'm not going to do it that way. So I think that probably the audience here and all the other reefers listening are probably thinking
There's a few on
half the other way.
There's a few on both sides.
Yeah.
Another hard lesson learned, and it's sitting right behind me, is that half of the tank rule for SPS. If you plan on having a SPS dominated system like the 160 back here, don't scape higher than half of the tank.
It's super hard. You're gonna struggle with it.
It looks empty and weird and foreign for the first. I mean, even the 750 XXL right now still looks like, what's missing here, because it looks empty.
Yeah, it's gonna be really hard. But then one day, the colonies, like, you had a 24-inch tall tank. You probably don't really want it within 3 or so inches of the top anyway. It's 21 inches. And if I went to half, man, eventually you're gonna have 8-inch colonies on the top. Now it looks empty when they're 1-inch nubbins, you know, but like, you don't want them growing out of the water, man. And so you want water flow around and in and throughout.
It's challenging.
It looks empty though.
Well, yeah. Now, I mean, you look at the 160 and it's completely jam-packed full. But there's a challenge now with all of that. You know, the top of the corals that are above the surface of the water, they are algae magnets when it comes to, like, algae, you know, needs bone, like non-tissue material to grow on and start to take over. So when you, all of that stuff that's raising up to the surface and dying because of course it can't grow out of the water, now holds on to little bits of algae and whatnot. And then flow is extremely difficult once they reach that high.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another hard lesson for me was the rod method just isn't worth it. I'd be curious to hear what you felt about it, but I just didn't feel like it was worth my time. It was way more effort than needed.
I had I made some really nice overhangs with it before, but trying to attempt that now with the rock that's available the most, which is the Marco type rock. It was easy when I was using Fiji and Pukani because the stuff is so easy to drill through and it's soft, and you know, I could drill a hole, cut a piece of fiberglass rod and stick it in there together and call it a day. Marco rock, yeah, a little harder to kind of work with like that. But
so Marco rock tends to explode when you're trying to drill through it, especially if you use a hammer drill. And the Fiji or the Pukani was like butter, right? The Fiji to me, man, actually was really hard to drill through too. You could burn up, you know, masonry bits.
Yeah.
Here was the part that I didn't like, is that, and you got two rocks and you're trying to like stack them in this perfect way. And so you'd have to have somebody hold the thing in the perfect way and then drill the rod through at a like parallel line or a straight line. And inevitably it never did that. And so like the hole would end up being at a different angle. And so the resulting rock would be at a different angle. And ultimately I was just like, I don't know, this is a lot of work. And now when I look at it, like, for avoiding $5 in epoxy, I'll pay the $5 for some epoxy, man.
Yeah,
and it's like more
really
than
get it done.
adequate for the purpose. I don't know. I'm sure there's some people out there that love the rod method. For me, I just don't believe in it, and I wouldn't use it. There's so many better ways that produce a better result with lower frustration, especially with today's type of rocks available.
Now when I see the impossible overhangs of the HNSAs and stuff like that, and how to get there with epoxy and glue and Instaset and all of this, and then going back and hiding all the joints, I would never do a rod again. For sure.
It's not worth it. The next one.
Hard lesson learned was that dry live rock has a nutrient sink.
Yeah, so dry live rock, what we found, and you don't really see it around much anymore, but was a hard lesson, was things like Pukani seem to have like a almost never-ending nutrient sink in it.
It's like people would, it's like a nutrient battery, right? And there's so many times where the question was asked is like, or that comment or that discussion thread on the forums would happen where my rock is causing my phosphate issue. My rock is leaching phosphates. Yeah, it was.
you know what? We found this out like towards the end of its availability.
Yeah.
Right? And like, I don't know, I read somewhere that like, hey, if phosphate has combined with calcium or whatever it does on the rock surface, it's probably going to be permanently bound up there. It's not going to be constantly releasing or whatever. And then I read later that that isn't true. You know? And this is the nature of actually, I didn't seek out a scientist in this. I was reading what was popularly believed by the reefing community, which was like flipping back and forth.
Right.
I probably should have sought out a chemist. But what I found right before the stuff started to dissipate was we went and cured a bunch of it. And like my thought process was always that the nitrate and phosphate came from the organics because there was like sponges and crabs and crap all over in the stuff, right?
Yeah, especially Pucani, that's super porous, meaning that these small organics still linger deep inside.
Okay, so we tried a bunch of different ways. We cured it with water. We cured it with acid. We cured it with bleach. And by the way, bleach is by far the best method of getting the organics off the rock.
Oxidizes the heck out of it.
Yeah, just like acid sounds like right, but it actually just eats some of the surface of the rock.
30% loss.
Yeah, and it gets really sharp. It's the bleach that actually oxidized all the organics off. But what we found is eventually you'll hit the point where it no longer adds nitrate to the tank. Right? And that meaning to me that the organics, whatever organics were there, were broken down. But man, the phosphate.
Still.
Yeah, like you'd add I would get a phosphate reading, and then it was, I don't remember what it would get to, but it would get to like 0.1, and then it would stay there. It wouldn't go any higher than that. And then we'd do 100% water change, and then we'd go back up to 0.1, and then it would stay there. It wouldn't get any higher. And then we'd do 100% water change, and it would slowly go back up to 0.1 and stay there. And like, I don't really know the mechanism of what was happening there, but apparently there was some kind of equilibrium of phosphate in the water and whatever stuck to the rock that it found its way to around 0.1. And I'm just theorizing here, to be honest, but like it became a moot point quickly after Fiji shut down the export of Pucani.
There's nothing left.
But this is probably, you could point fingers at Pucani like, oh, well, that must be bad. Well, eventually every piece of rock you put in your tank is going to have that same kind of thing, man. The phosphate is going to get bound to its surface the same way it did in the ocean. And it's probably going to have a very similar result. They're just calcium chloride or calcium carbonate based structure. So what magic thing about that one's different than another? Especially because phosphate's at such a higher concentration in our tanks than it is in the ocean. I don't know. You know what would be different though is because the phosphate that's bound up in the Pucani was actually, it's like Pacillipora, I think, skeleton. And then often what we're using now is a man-made, or not man, like a million-year-old mined rock.
Yeah. It's been under a lot of pressure, heat, all kinds of stuff.
And I never get any phosphate. That one, the mined stuff, like we've never gotten a phosphate reading out of using new stuff, curing it, doing all the things. So the only way would be if it like pulled it out of the water, bound it up, and then re-released it some other day.
Yeah.
It's possible, but the stuff that was coming from the Pucani was the fact that it was probably built into its skeleton as it was growing to begin with.
Yeah. Another hard lesson learned here is promoting coralline is the best way to outcompete many issues. If coralline's on it, algae can't be on the coralline.
The coralline will prevent a lot of pests from settling.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you can get coralline to grow on the tank, whether I found the best ways is to find some source of coralline from a tank you deem safe-ish.
Yeah. Not this 160.
Yeah. And then if you can scrape off a chunk of it and then kind of grind it up into like a powderish, turn off all the pumps and let it settle out somewhere in the tank, that turns out to be the best way to spread it throughout. There's also that stuff like Arc Reef, the coralline in a bottle. I haven't had enough experience with it to say.
Is that the only thing you seeded your 360 with?
Nah, we ended up putting corals in there too. But that tank had so many ups and downs. It's hard to really
point the finger.
I'd love to test that again, whether or not coralline in a bottle actually works. But I'd love it. It should. If it doesn't work that way, I mean, I've always thought that somebody should just grow it on little glass slides.
Oh yeah.
You know, and then overnight the glass slides of the different colors, and you can just scrape it off with a razor into the tank.
That'd be great.
Like, somebody should do that.
If you're farming, if you're gonna farm rock, do the coralline thing too.
Well, you know, you think about it, like, you know, it's hard to like look at bottles of water and feel like there's anything in them. Right? But if you send me a little dish of trays of coralline algae growing on the surfaces that I'm scraping off, I know what that is.
That's material.
I don't know. So it's probably not only helpful, but also marketable, I guess. But yeah, coralline algae, if you can promote it. And the best things you can promote coralline algae, by the way, is maintaining an 8.3 pH as well as a high alkalinity. So those two things will, you know, fuel coralline algae growth. I've found that low pH tanks just don't grow coralline algae. In fact, what we found at one point was a lot of people believed that kalkwasser tanks grow coralline algae better.
Oh, it
right?
makes sense if your kalkwasser's raising pH.
So you can say, well, is it the kalkwasser or is it the two-part? It's because the kalkwasser is raising the pH more than the two-part is, the hydroxide.
Yeah.
So and that's at least what I believe anyway. But high pH will allow organisms to calcify faster. They can precipitate the skeleton out faster. We've seen it time and time again. So if you want to promote coralline algae, that is the best way to outcompete many pests that grow on surfaces.
100%. Another hard lesson, Gulf rock is a double-edged sword. This one is one we're learning actually right now. This is my first experience with like Gulf rock or real, actual live rock shipped overnight from the ocean. So I've never seen it before in firsthand, never used it before firsthand. But once we got it, I was like, man, look at all the cool stuff on here.
If you walk the average person around all 12 tanks and you didn't only asked them which one do you like the most, 100 out of 100 pick that one.
Yeah, there's orange sponges on there. There's life on there. There's big giant gorilla crabs that are actually eating some of the cold clownfish. But
it's colorful.
Double-edged sword, though, meaning that hey, you want like Insta-tank cycled and ready to go, like we said up at the top of the last one. You know, one of live rock is one of the best for the first 12 months of a brand new reefer. You know, because it gets you there. It's like it's almost instantaneously. But then it comes with all those pests.
Dude, you look at it, like I said, 100 out of 100, look at it and say, oh, look at it, it's covered in purple and orange sponges and coralline. There's zoanthids growing on it. There's feather dusters growing on it. There's all these little critters already on it. Cool. 100%. Right, but also all those pests that come with it, fish eaters, parasites.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I would do if I use Gulf rock is I would go fowler or I would go without fish for 2 months. So I would make sure like the parasitic isopods and stuff like that. I'd figure out whatever the life cycle of those types of things are, and I would have the tank up and going without those things in it for a period of time because I don't want. That's the stuff that matters to me the most. I don't want to see my fish with a parasite hanging off of it.
I just want to order live rock again and put it in its tank of its own just to see what it comes with and watch that stuff live.
Yeah,
I'm just excited to see the pests. That's one thing that like, oh man, because it's just like a surprise every day.
We joke all the time. Like some of you probably heard the story before, but we had a gentleman here, Brandon, that bought some of this, and he came to work one day and he's like, dude, I have a fish in my tank and I didn't put any fish in the tank. You ever heard of a hitchhiking fish before? And I'm like, oh my God, do you have cucumbers? And he's like, yeah, I put some cucumbers in there. Like, you got a butt fish. There's this long little skinny fish that lives inside the butts of cucumbers. And so you get these kinds of things, you know. Gulf rock, those are fairly common. People get octopuses and stuff.
Oh yeah,
and like you get all kinds of really crazy stuff. You probably don't know how to care for an octopus is the sad part, but
nope.
like you get all kinds of really weird stuff when you get that level of life. Because what they do with that Gulf rock is they take all that mined rock from Florida and they just go drop a whole, you know, container ship of the stuff off the side of the boat. they come back 3 years later and collect it all, and now it's filled with all kinds of life.
It's ready to go. Yeah.
And they bring it back to you, and because it's not like, at one point we decided to get air rock from Fiji. And so it was kind of the same thing. They would pull it out and put it in Fiji. And that Fiji rock, you had to turn it around in LA, get it immediately on a plane, because all the sponges, all the other stuff on it starts to die pretty rapidly when you pull it out of water. And they actually, you know, to do the dry, or not the dry, but the like normal Fiji boxed rock that sits on a container ship for 2 months, they'd scrub all of the sponges and all the life off of it first, right? Well, with the Gulf rock, they bring it in and they usually put it in bags of water and then ship it airport to airport. So you'll have to go to your local airport and pick it up, but it's still sitting in bags of actual water. That's why all this stuff stays alive. And some of you are like, oh, that speaks to me. And other people who've gone through it will say, yeah, that was a really cool experience. Like, I'll just say for me, it was a really cool experience for my first tank. I think it was part of why my first tank was so successful. And I'd never do it again. I don't know. Would you do it?
Yeah, just because I want a tank that just has. I'm not gonna set that tank up for anything else. I'm just gonna buy the Gulf rock just to see what comes on it.
See what comes on it. That's an interesting take on it, actually, because you actually get all the weird stuff out of the ocean, right? All right, next one.
Hard lesson learned. Assuming that epoxy and glue will go away. And my Aquascape in my office, I did nothing but gobs and gobs of super glue, and now I've got gobs and gobs of super glue 2 years later. Still can see it.
Yep.
It didn't get hidden.
So a lot of people say, like, oh, why you spend all that time trying to hide the glue and the epoxy? And it's because it's an eyesore, you know? And like, oh, it'll get covered in coralline algae and gunk someday.
If you let go of that mindset, you'll be a lot happier, and you won't be surprised when you still see epoxy.
I'm just gonna say it like it is. I think part of this is just defense against the fact that I didn't do it before, and I want to feel okay about it.
Could be.
You know, I don't know, because if you cover it up and make it look nice, it'll look nice from day one. And the part that a lot of people miss is the parts of the epoxy and glue that aren't exposed to light are never going to grow coralline algae on it, right? And so you're just going to see that stuff forever until something grows in the way. There is a way to hide it day one. If you can, do it.
Put some super glue down and spray some sand on it.
Even if you just put some super glue and sand on it and it didn't even match the color that you're looking at,
that will eventually grow stuff on it.
The sand will actually grow stuff on it faster than the purple epoxy or whatever will. So
yeah.
All right. Not being able to move the 170. Oh, hard lesson. We already talked about this a little bit, but for us, not being able to move the 170 or the 750, and actually the 170, the E170, we put a yellow tang in there in the beginning, right? And the process we always said is, hey, dude, you just, when the tang outgrows that small space, you just move it. Well, you know, it got to the point where it was big enough that it needed to be moved out of that tank, but we couldn't catch it because there's so much coral growth in there. And eventually, man, we had to trim the hell out of all the coral, and broke a bunch of it trying to get this fish out.
Yeah, I tried to chase him with a tube because there's a little nook in the back behind it, and kind of wiggle him out, blow some bubbles in there, try to get it out. Got it eventually, but
if we could have just lifted the Aquascape out, took the fish out, and put it back in,
done.
Yeah. So especially for small tanks, if you're going to put a fish in, you know full well is going to outgrow this tank. The one Aquascape that's stable and built as a single piece, big win.
Yeah, not just for ease for you, but even lack of stress on everybody else, corals included. Like if I can remove this, if I can pull out my rock, get what I need, and put it back together like that, I don't have to do what I did on the E170 and just chop coral, haircuts, you know, fisher, there's detritus, there's everything, you know, you're stirring up everything.
So some of you are probably already bought in, but I'll tell everyone who's built an Aquascape that is a one piece and had the satisfaction of being able to pull it out in one piece will say, oh, I'm so glad I did this. You know, so I don't know. The hard lesson here also is, you heard this already, but build it dry and then cure. Don't cure the rock first and then. the curing all the rock first kind of came from an era which wasn't all that long ago, which
Yeah.
is I'm just going to stack and glue it together.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be out of the water that long, or I can even do it underwater.
Not doing that anymore.
Yeah, well, now build the Aquascape and then go cure it in the, you know, the like either a horse trough or your salt mixing bin or whatever it is. If you cure it with epoxy, you can actually just set it on pretty much any side. I mean, our whole Aquascapes, I'm flipping them around all over the place, and they never broke. In fact, I look for it to break. I'm intentionally turning it upside down and doing work on it so that it does break. So I know where the weak spots are, and I can actually put more epoxy in. So embrace the break. All right. So what's next?